One of the worst lies ever told in the West is that there needs to be an expanding population to enable a nation to enjoy the prosperity of an ever-expanding economy. At best, it is probably true that capitalism needs a growing population to keep labor passive. The argument is in fact at best a contradiction and at worst an element of a malicious criminal conspiracy to destroy the West in defense of an Eastern-style oligarchy. If one can imagine an enslaved population with an Oriental oligarch complete with harems and an absence of any restraining factors such as morality, we will have a pretty good analogy to what the future holds for the West. Production cannot keep up with population expansion unless the product is shared equally, which it is less likely to do, as the population grows as a ratio to the available capital. A highly developed nation with greater capital resources is more resilient to capital exhaustion than a nation with only meager supplies of capital, but the center of gravity still exists and can be passed. The desire to bring immigrants to replace the native population is ill-advised for a number of reasons. Bodies do not make production. Productivity is not related to demographics, but to capital as a ratio of population. Adding more bodies to a stable or declining capital pool only makes things worse. Bring in an adult population without the culturalization needed by a capital-intensive society is likely to create substantial costs with few benefits. Living in a highly technical civilization requires habits not cultivated in far less developed places. Things like predictable behavior and regular habits may not exist in people who come from cultures where life is less regulated by the time of day. However, there is a more subtle and corrosive element that comes with immigration not handled properly. More people from the same cultural background, or at least the same historical antecedents, will likely mesh and create a compatible compromise. But cultures that were never compatible, that share a history of war and conflict and elements that cannot be reconciled, are going to create serious dislocation in the body politic. Even if the culture has a different view about what is acceptable so far as honesty is concerned, it is going to create a cultural shock in those who were brought up in the West's tradition of respect for private property. When everything must be locked up and guarded, and the guards watched, it is only the most wealthy who can afford to purchase anything beyond what is absolutely necessary. This reduction in the level of trusts will have serious impacts on the economy. How much we'll spend on their children if buying them anything beyond what is necessary and ordinary will make them the subject of attacks by those who are less fortunate. It was the high level of trust found in Christian countries that made them prime vehicles of economic development and expansion. A culture of trust translates into a military that is reliable and disciplined. When you see 10 teams acting with discipline and professionalism, you and your team will likely attempt to equal or even surpass the example of the other groups. A military made up of such teams is far less likely to break and run. Diversity in economics is beneficial, but there is a process that takes us there. The process is not helped in any way by a diversity of cultures or of peoples, what is sometimes referred to as races. Running a sawmill or working on an assembly line is not helped by having multiple cultures staff the positions. The more likely result will be an increase in tensions on the shop floor and a tribalization of the social relations in any highly diversified organizations. One never finds equally mixed groups. Usually, there is a majority group and one or two members of other races, if there is any mixing at all. Everyone looks for their peer group and those who look similar to them. However, the negative factors of trying for a highly diversified population is excused on the basis of necessity. The native population will not do certain jobs, or there are not sufficient workers to staff all of the positions which are open. Therefore, goes the argument, the nation needs other groups who may not fit in and who may bring their own issues and problems, but who can do the jobs which need to be done. This argument is true if, and only if nothing else changes. If we work from the assumption that the situation which exists is the only possible way of living, then bringing in foreign workers is the only option open to us. However, let's assume that nothing is off the table and the West is free to make whatever changes it thinks are necessary. To start with, are the people we have gainfully employed? Are we making the best use of the workers which we have? The answer is a negative. D0 we have full employment. If not, it is presumptive to declare a need for additional workers. Indeed, it could well worsen the situation. If we have surplus numbers in the sense they are not fully employed, and we hire additional workers who are less than employable, The temptation might be to find make-work jobs for them, which give them the appearance but not the reality of working. This does not create prosperity and, in fact, reduces it. Prosperity is capital divided by population, capital being all that which has value, meaning it would be purchased by someone in preference to the other available options. This is also the definition of employment. Full employment is reached when every able-bodied adult is producing a product or service that others will purchase in preference to the other available options. The able-bodied must produce capital equal or greater than the cost of their upkeep. It is mathematically impossible for any population, of any size, to all be working at productive jobs and there be a shortage of labor. The only possible explanation for a labor shortage is for a percentage of the consumers to be parasites, i.e., they consume without producing, and so more persons are required to do the jobs not being done by the parasitic population. Regardless, the capitalist system cannot create full employment. The closer it gets to this point, the worse the inflation gets. When there is very low unemployment, labor begins to want its full share and the parasites do not wish to work, and so they will do whatever it takes to prevent labor from accessing their full measure of what they are legitimately entitled to. Because parasites will not work, they give in to the wage demands, but they do not increase productivity by adding to the labor force. Higher wages without increased productivity increases the upward pressure on prices. Without reducing the demand for more goods and services, or increasing them, higher wages will produce inflation. Inflation is just the demand aligning itself with supply. Communism fares no better because communism has as many, if not more, parasites. If one adds non-productive jobs to the economy, it is the same as giving raises when there is no increased productivity. More people getting more money without a corresponding increase in productivity causes inflation. There are only two things which create prosperity and one thing which destroys prosperity. People need to work and get paid for what they do, and they need to trust the process enough to specialize. All increases in productivity is due to specialization. The one thing that hinders or even reverses the process is parasitism. A parasite does not produce goods or services people will buy in preference to other options. Indeed, a parasite is of necessity someone who expropriates what he consumes. The parasite is always violent or a source of the threat of violence. By definition, the parasite is not given what he gets, willingly or by choice. The only reason why a stable population might not be prosperous is because of parasites. When there are parasites, there needs to be additional people to expropriate wealth from. This is especially so when the number of parasites is increasing. It is not the number of persons available that is the real issue. The problem is the number of persons needed to create specialization. However, there only needs to be 3 persons to begin the process of specialization. Specialization increases as the number of participants increases. The important point is to ensure each speciality is needed by the group, adds to the prosperity of the total, and pays for what it gets without needing anything but the mechanisms of the market to obtain compensation for what it provides.